So we must do two things, two great things together, to encompass that enormous new view that lies before us, but to encompass it within the framework of science, to see it within the whole categorical framework of science, and to see that these two are not separate, but that they are wedded. The bigness of the idea, the newness of the idea, the greatness of it is one with the structure of science, the structure of being itself. So Truth as Mind has shown us exactly what we see in the epitome, that it is a knowledge of the true God and the true man that alone can grasp the wonders of God, the wonders of infinite love, the Father of all. And so we come to the subtone of spirit, and the epitome is that a consciousness that dwells in the spiritual is governed by God. If we are sensibly with the body, you see now going back to that which is entropic within us, an equilibrium standpoint within us, a standpoint that hasn't been informed and evolved into an autopoietic, dynamic, conscious system of itself and of its principle. What is that? To be sensibly with the body. That's the opposite, isn't it? If we are sensibly with the body and regard omnipotence as a corporeal, material person, you see how many times she brings in that sense of the corporeal, the corporeality. It's the opposite of the word that is being built up through these prayers. A material person whose ear we would gain, we would not be absent, we are not absent from the body and present with the Lord. So the first is a depiction of mortal consciousness, that mortal consciousness is material, that it's rooted in that corporeality and not in the incorporeal word of life. And so we try to gain the ear, a corporeal, we've had the lips and the ear and several other things, I think. Not to be absent from the body, you see, is mortal consciousness, but to be present with the Lord, absent from the body, is spiritual consciousness. This is spiritual. And what does it demonstrate? What is it a demonstration of? Of spirit. Truth demonstrates spirit. We cannot serve two masters. This is a spirit issue again, that spiritual consciousness cannot entertain two standpoints within itself. Only one pure standpoint, that standpoint that has been built within us, evolved within us, from mind to spirit to soul to principle to life, which is truth. This is a spiritual consciousness. It doesn't entertain anything else. We cannot serve two masters in that state. It's actually a scientific law. It isn't a moral thing. Oh, you cannot and you must not and you should not. We perhaps hear it that way at first, but actually it's a divine law that says it's impossible for you to have two consciousnesses. You can, at this point in the development, in the whole evolution of yourself as a dynamic living system, you are conscious of only one thing, to be present with the Lord. And this is to have not mere emotional ecstasy or faith. She counters we keep feeling that soul aspect coming in. throughout the text because she says that the Lord's Prayer is the prayer of soul. It's the prayer of the incorporeal sense within us and not the corporeal sense. The corporeal sense is that which builds on emotional ecstasy and faith. It isn't that, but it is the actual demonstration and understanding of life. So the demonstration of spirit is the demonstration of life. This is truth as revealed in Christian Science. To be with the Lord is to be in obedience to the law of God, right? To the law of the Word, to the law of the incorporeal Word. To be with the Lord, that is to have a spiritualized consciousness, a divine consciousness, is the outcome, the outgrowth of your obedience to, your adhering to mind, spirit, soul, principle, life. Obedience to that law means you are with the Lord. You are divinely conscious. It is to be absolutely governed by divine love. And we hear that divine principle love saying, don't forget, what's going on the level of Christian Science is really interworking with the levels of absolute Christian Science, and behind the whole thing stands divine science, the divine cybernetic principle love. That we are being absolutely governed by that divine cybernetic principle, and this is spirit. As though to take the whole model of being and say, this governing by divine love of itself and of the whole universe is spirit. The whole thing is spirit. And so you are governed by spirit and not by matter. Our self-organizing principle is spirit. Divine love is spirit. So a consciousness that dwells in the spiritual is governed by God. Truth is soul. A spiritual consciousness has reforming power. Here's the soul office of reformation, and now we see that consciousness too is continuing to reform something. It has a reforming office. What is it doing to us? Oh, she says, become conscious for a single moment that life and intelligence are purely spiritual. See, build on everything that's gone before. Even if you only have that for a single moment, the body will utter no complaints. Yeah. Become conscious that life and intelligence are neither in nor of matter, and the body will then utter no complaints. It's a spiritualized consciousness that we see here, what it does, what a spiritualized consciousness does. If suffering, the opposite of soul, from a belief in sickness, you will find yourself suddenly well in that moment, in that timeless moment of spiritualized consciousness. Sorrow is turned into, this is soul, isn't it? Turned into, it's also cybernetic, turned into joy when the body is controlled. Control mechanisms, the homeostasis, the homeoresia, controlled by spiritual life, truth, and love. Hence, life, truth, and love. See how something's so enormous and I have to go right over it. I leave it to you to find out what life, truth, and love is, as it is nested in the whole week of what we have done together. That we are being controlled by life, truth, and love. Think of that word vertical, huh? That whole word vertical that is breaking in as the chapter prayer We saw that source in the word of life, which, as absolute Christian science, is the law of life, truth, and love, impelling itself on us as the word order. Hence the hope of the promise Jesus bestows. He that believeth on me, the works that I do, shall he do also. The works that the I does, we shall do in this consciousness. Because I go to the Father. I go unto my Father. The I, you see, to go to the Father means that the only I of us is present, as she says, with truth and love. That because the ego is absent from the body, she explains, and present with truth and love, the works are done. We can do the works of truth, the works of the calculus, the works of our cybernetic principle. So the ego means absence from the body, from a bodily consciousness. To be absent from a bodily consciousness then enables us to do Jesus' works, which were the works of the ego. They weren't personal works. They were the works of his conscious presence with truth and love. Truth and love. Remember what we've seen about truth and love as overforming the whole of the textbook matrix. Yeah? Truth and love and the science order. The Lord's Prayer is the prayer of soul. So to say, this is the state of consciousness that can pray aright. It's the prayer of soul and not of material sense. So it's a prayer that can be prayed only when we are in absolute identity, absolute conscious identity with the Father, with the principle of being, and the senses have been silenced. So a spiritual consciousness, as we've seen, has reforming power. We come to truth as principle. That consciousness now, consciousness of the supremacy of soul, has dominion over the whole earth, over every detail. The epitome is that this prayer of true consciousness has dominion over the compound idea, the earth, and authority over error and sickness. Entirely separate from the belief and dream of material living is the life divine, revealing spiritual understanding and the consciousness of man's dominion over the whole earth. And that earth is the compound idea, isn't it? The content of that consciousness, the domain of truth, the dominion of truth, is the dominion over the whole earth, over the compound idea within us, the complex idea within us. If we had time, I could read you what she says about the complex idea. She mentions it only once in her writings and connects it with the compound, saying that man, as the idea or image and likeness of the infinite God, is a compound, complex idea or likeness of the infinite one, or one infinite, whose image is the reflection of all that is real and eternal in infinite identity. And I would like you to read the whole of that article, the article in which that appears, because it is in Questions and Answers in Miscellany on page 239 to 240. And it's the question about the millennium. Must mankind wait for the ultimate of the millennium until every man and woman comes into the knowledge of Christ, and all are taught of God and see their apparent identity as one man and one woman? Must we wait for that, for God to be represented by his idea or image and likeness? And so the whole question of the millennium, the place value of the millennium, what a millennium is, she says it's a state and stage of mental advancement going on since ever time was. Oh, might as well read the whole thing. Only a few lines left now. So that's the question. You heard the question. Do we have to wait for that, for everyone to find their identity, for every man and woman to find this identity, in order for God to be represented by his idea or image and likeness? She says, God is one, and his idea, image or likeness, man, is one. But God is infinite, and so includes all in one. Man is the generic term for men and women. Man, as the idea or image and likeness of the infinite God, is a compound, complex idea or likeness of the infinite one, or one infinite, whose image is the reflection of all that is real and eternal in infinite identity. Gender means a kind. Hence, mankind, in other words, a kind of man who is identified by sex, is the material, so-called man, born of the flesh, and is not the spiritual man created by God, Spirit, who made all that was made. The millennium is a state and stage of mental advancement, going on since ever time was. As long as there was time, the belief of time, there's been mental advancement. And a state and stage of mental advancement coined by the nature of love. The millennium, its impetus is accelerated by the advent of Christian Science, and is marked, and will increase till all men shall know him, divine love, from the least to the greatest, and one God and the brotherhood of man shall be known and acknowledged throughout the earth. All right, so we're looking at truth as principle, and that dominion, that this consciousness is the dominion over the compound idea, over the complex idea. She equates the compound idea with the complex idea in that article. Nowhere else does she use the term complex. And so the complex idea within us is brought into one realm, one domain, and it is the domain of the compound idea over which we have authority. And that authority is also the authority over error and sickness. Let me read the text again. entirely separate from the belief and dream of material living, is the life divine, revealing spiritual understanding and the consciousness of man's dominion over the whole earth. This understanding casts out error and heals the sick, and with it you can speak as one having authority. And that leads us to truth as life. That this consciousness opens the source of God's blessings. We come to life which always has to do with the method of life, with the way of life. And so she gives the method of consciousness. How to have this consciousness now is, so to say, reduced. Everything that we have seen as the way to have this consciousness is reduced to a method and stated in 4 lines. When thou prayest, sense of mind, enter into thy closet, the sanctuary of spirit, and when thou hast shut thy door, shut out the material senses, the sinful sense, pray to thy Father, principle, which is in secret. And thy Father which seeth in secret shall reward thee openly. We get the open reward, that this full sense of the 7-fold aspect of prayer, of the prayer of consciousness, is the method. This is the method for consciousness. And that the result of that method will be the open reward of love, what we find when we come to the main tone of love. Truth as truth. That this consciousness, with its method, silences erring sense. So consciousness that has gone the way of truth wipes out erring sense. That doesn't sound very cybernetic, but it's cybernetic if we think of the homeostasis working, the homeorrhea working. Both of these principles working together are bringing out the greater and greater complexity within us. And this is the resolving of any erring sense, any false consciousness. That the true consciousness then is that which has audience with spirit. Referring back, as truth always does, to life, the subtone of truth refers back to the subtone of life, to the method of consciousness, and she says, so spake Jesus. The closet typifies the sanctuary of spirit, the door of which shuts out sinful sense, but lets in truth, life, and love. Closed to error, it is open to truth, and vice versa. If it is open to error, then it is closed to truth. You see? That's when we still have to work out our right sense of being closed, our right sense of being open. But having stayed in the dynamic of the word order, we see that the true consciousness is closed to error and open to truth. And it is a silencing of the erring sense. The Father in secret is unseen to the physical senses, but He knows all things. There's that wonderful pedal note that goes through the whole chapter, the pedal note from the second scriptural note. Your Father knoweth. Your Father knoweth what things ye have need of before ye ask. The Father in secret is unseen to physicality, but He knows all things and rewards according to motives, not according to speech. to enter into the heart of prayer, a touch of mind and spirit, to enter mind into the heart of prayer, spirit, the door of the erring senses, soul must be closed. Lips must be mute and materialism silent, that man may have audience with spirit, consciousness of truth, consciousness of being one with the divine principle, love, the divine cybernetic principle, love, which destroys all error, truth. Truth as love. We come to the attractor in the field of truth, to love. That consciousness, you see, that we have just looked at and that has been depicted, that truth as truth was really falling back on truth as life to explain further the form of that method. And that's a consciousness that wipes out erring sense, false consciousness, and has audience with spirit. What is the final word on this consciousness from the standpoint of love? That to practice such a consciousness, to be such a consciousness, is itself answered prayer. It is its own answer, isn't it? Prayer is its own answer. So to desire aright, you can see to desire aright, to pray aright, is the answer. And so we see it again as a sevenfold scientific must. She gives those musts. We must, we must, we must. And we know that behind those musts is not the morality of the human, but the law of the divine. So in order to pray aright, we must enter into the closet and shut the door. Mind. We must close the lips and silence the material senses. In the quiet sanctuary of earnest longings, that's all spirit, we must deny sin and plead God's allness, soul. We must resolve to take up the cross and go forth with honest hearts to work and watch for wisdom, truth, and love, principle. We must pray without ceasing, life. Such prayer is answered, love, insofar as we put our desires into practice, truth. The Master's injunction is that we pray in secret and let our lives attest our sincerity. So we have the attractor, the conclusion, the fulfillment of the consciousness of truth, and in the same time, at the same time, we have the indication that love is coming upon us, that the attractor for all of these prayers is the prayer of love.